It's finally time to start my ranunculus, and this year I'm going to be doing them a little bit differently. So, for 3 years, I've had a ranuncular patch. This is my fourth year, I think. This is going to be my fourth year of my ranuncular patch, or is it my third? Anyway, doesn't matter. And I love it because it's just, I plant all my ranunculus in one place and it gives just such amazing blast of colour and sort of lushness in that particular patch as you walk and approach the garden. It's just a really nice way. I have tried growing ranunculus as drifts amongst other flowers and they just don't have the same impact. I really like to grow them as just a huge flush of compact flowers together, and then I can use them as cut flowers, and then I'm going to harvest them, remove them all, and then in place, the idea what last year was to plant zinnias which would have a similar kind of look and feel, but definitely the birds did something with those zinnias, I think. I don't know, but I only had 3 zinnias in the end grow, which was absolutely not the effect I was going for. So I'm going to rethink that plan this year. But for now, I still love the ranuncular bed, so I'm going to do it again. So let's go back to the beginning when I used to do my ranunculus when I started. So there was 3 stages. Is obviously buy your ranunculus, then soak them for 3 to 4 hours, then pre-sprout them, and that can take anything from sort of 2 to 3, 4 weeks, whatever, and then you can just keep them going till you plant them out when it's safe to plant them out. But I've revised that now because I'm really behind time, and I realised I don't think I need to pre-sprout ranunculus in the UK. So let's talk a bit about my zone then. So I'm zone 9, 8, 9, I never know because we don't really have zones in the UK. So I'll tell you more about my temperature and then you can work out if it's right for you. We have quite a temperate climate. We rarely reach 100 in the summer. Occasionally we have a summer where we do, and even if we do, it doesn't last forever. It's not typical. It might be a few days, maybe even just one day. Occasionally we've had it for 4 days to 7 days and we've called it a massive heat wave and everybody's on red alert. When you have normal, this is normal for parts of you in America, or Australia even, and yeah, Canada even. But yeah, so we're a temperate climate. So on the flip side, in the winter, we don't really have those long, hard winters. Of course, we do still have frost, and it goes down to probably, I had -10 for 1 year. I've lived here 8 years in this house, and I remember 1 year we got down to -10 for several days. And I simply remember that because I had an outdoor rabbit at the time, and he did not like coming in, and he couldn't come in, so I had to keep running out with more straw and cardboard out to sort of like insulate his hutch, and I took out hot water bottles and all sorts of things to keep him warm, and he was absolutely fine. He was so hardy, that rabbit. He lived till he was 11, so he did well. And so that's how I remember that was a really cold year. So a lot of the plants that generally overwinter well in the garden probably would have died that year, but I wasn't paying as much attention to things living or dying in the garden back then, not as much as I am now. So, but typically our winter is about -5. Obviously, that varies in the UK as well. The further north you get, the colder it gets. But I'm in the southeast of England, just below London, and it stays fairly mild. So that's why I call it zone 8 or 9. You'll know better what your zone is. So -5 up to 100 max, and even those extremes are only brief periods. Okay, so that's our climate. Everything else in between is fairly temperate, mild. It's not exaggerated, it's not extreme. So, on that basis, then, when I was looking at my ranunculus, I was doing the ranunculus on the basis that they couldn't tolerate frost at all. And it turns out they can, which makes sense because they're Persian buttercups. They are from the buttercup family. The buttercup, of course, is extremely hardy. Ranunculus are not as hardy as obviously the wild buttercups that you get out in the meadows, but they're pretty hardy. I mean, Persia obviously can have quite cold winters too. So what I've noticed is that they've come up in my garden and they have even set leaves in the autumn because we had that heat wave, but I think generally they do anyway. I have noticed in previous years that they have come up again in autumn. And this year, I know we've had down to -5. It could possibly have been slightly colder than that, but the ranunculus have in fact survived, both the ones outside and the ones inside the greenhouse. That said, the ones in the greenhouse had a 50-50 survival rate, and the ones in the soil seem to have all survived. So I think even in pots in the greenhouse, those corms get too cold compared to the cozy duvet effect of the soil. So monitoring these ones outside made me think I'm not going to pre-sprout them indoors this year. I'm going to skip that step and have them pre-sprout straight in the ground. Because obviously we pre-sprout them so that we can protect them from frost and have more control over them. But if they can handle a little bit of frost, a frost like -5 or 6 will obviously freeze the soil, but it won't freeze it all the way down. And so we're going to plant them about 5 to 6 centimeters down so we can avoid the frost getting them. But also we need that darkness. So one of the things I noticed when I did pre-sprout them was that they need darkness. When I had them, even when there was a shaft of light from a window, not even in the same room, but it kind of came across the landing where I had my ranunculus pre-sprouting, that was enough light to stop them pre-sprouting. So they need to be in darkness. So that is why they need to be in either a dark room or to be completely covered by soil. But then obviously as I've got more experience, I thought, well, why am I even doing that? If they just need darkness, they can go in the soil. The soil is warmer, it's that thermal mass principle where the soil is going to be warmer than, say, for instance, something you're growing in a pot, which might be more vulnerable to a frost. But I am going to talk just quickly about the pre-sprouting that I've done before. If you are nervous that your ranunculus won't survive any frosts that you have, or if you just want to have a little bit more control if it's your first time doing ranunculus. But the first thing you've got to do is clean and then soak your ranunculus. So that's what I'm doing here. These are ones I dug up from last year. I didn't want to leave them in the bed because obviously I didn't want dying flowers in the bed. I wanted to change them over. So I dug them up, but I could have left them and they would have grown back themselves. I didn't do that, obviously, so I've had to store them, and I've stored them in a dry room in the garage where the tumble dryer is going and it's warm and dry in there. And then this year I've got them back out again. If you notice, I also put sawdust so that if there was any moisture in the soil, in the ranunculus corms, then it would help them dry out because you don't want them to sit and rot. Then, because I don't clean off the soil, I didn't have that much time, I just left them to dry. I am going to clean the soil off them before I soak them. So if you just bought them, you won't need to sort of clean them off, they'll already be clean. And so you can just soak them for 3 to 4 hours in water. And I'm just going to do exactly the same, but what I'm going to do here with my dug up ranunculus, these are mine, they're not new. I'm going to keep rinsing them in clean water until till the water runs clean, and then I'm going to soak them because I don't want them sitting in sort of pathogens and things like that, which will be sort of reanimated by the liquid. So you leave them to soak 3 to 4 hours and until they're plump. See, the corms will plump up. They'll be very different to when they were little dry, spindly things. They hardly even look viable. Some are so small, but they will still produce a plant. So don't be fooled by size. The bigger the size, the more flowers you'll get, but it doesn't mean the tiny spindly ones won't produce a flower. So just bear that in mind. Once you've soaked them, people talk about oxygenating, bubbling. I mean, really, no, I don't do any of that. I may switch out the water once or twice just to oxygenate it. You just don't want stagnant water. You're not likely to get that in cold weather either. It's usually perhaps if you're already doing them when it's quite warm, or you're doing them indoors where it's quite warm, then just freshen up the water and oxygenate it, clean it a bit in case any viruses have started to develop. Then once they've plumped up, if you're going to do them indoors, I would still, if you want to do it with less soil, because obviously, compost, whatever, it costs money, it's a resource, you can just sort of do a little tiny sprinkling of soil, just sort of push the roots into the soil. This is the same for anemones, by the way. I should have said this is the same for anemones, but I haven't done my anemones this year because I have a love-hate relationship with anemones. I just don't think they fit in my garden particularly, and I don't really like them, especially as a cut flower either. But anyhow, it's the same process with anemones if you're doing those, because you tend to do them about the same time. Then you push them into the soil, and then they need to be dark. So however you engineer that darkness is up to you. You can put more soil on, but it's not a sprinkling. It would have to be a good centimetre, 2 centimetres, an inch over to completely block out the light, or put them in a darkened room where you completely block out the light, but the light must be blocked out. The soil or any medium that you're using must not be sopping wet. It must be kind of just moist, not wringing wet, not dripping water, just moist. You don't want to rot your ranunculus or your anemones. And that's the same with my bed where I'm going to put them. So we haven't had rain for a few days, but the soil being clay is still very moist. I am going to add a little bit more compost because I'm concerned that they've grown in this bed for a few years and they'll be using the same resources, and then those resources will be exhausted. So I am going to just add some more nutrients to the soil before I plant them, just to give them the best chance. And then I am going to just water the soil again because I'm going to cover mine so they're not going to get rain. I'm going to have to monitor the soil for the levels of moisture and maybe just water them once a week or something like that, because you don't want them to dry out. Even if you can't see them growing, you do not want them to dry out. All right, so depth of planting. So it's easier sometimes to understand the depth of planting if you understand the needs of the plant. So what we're going to do is we want complete darkness, obviously, and we don't want the frost to get it and damage it. This is, of course, if we're putting them out before the frosts have passed, which even if you're pre-sprouting them, you may want to do that. You may want to put them out before the risk of frost has gone, because they are a cool flowering plant. So you don't want to wait until they get really hot. They're not going to flower. They're going to get yellow leaves. They're just going to really struggle. So you don't want to do that. So as soon as they've pre-sprouted, you'll want to put them out. In my case, I'm not even waiting for them to pre-sprout before I put them out. So what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about they've got to be in the darkness and they've got to be just below where the frost is going to hit them. So about 4 to 5 centimetres. What would that be? 2.5, 3 inches. Maybe 3 inches, a little bit deep. About 2.5 inches. Just the prong of a fork, I think, like of my gardening fork, deep. So I go down that deep. Then I know they're going to be in the darkness, and I know they're not going to be hit hard by a frost because it won't freeze the soil that deep. I mean, it might, but I'm going to take a chance. Well, I'm also going to cover it, so that's why I'm not too concerned. I'm covering it with my little polytunnel. And so that's what you're thinking about. It's just so you can understand the logic. And so if you have pre-sprouted them, you think, oh, well, they're pre-sprouted anyway, so they don't need to be in darkness. I just won't plant them as deep. But you might still have the frost issue. Now, on the other hand, also, even if you don't have a frost issue, they are cool flowering plants. So if you don't plant them as deeply, if you have a hot spring, that's going to affect the quality of the plant. They're not going to like it. So I've noticed, for instance, when I've planted ranunculus in pots compared to the ranunculus in the ground, when we have a very hot period, the ranunculus will wither and fade and be thin and pathetic. They just will struggle in the pot because if you think about it, the pot heats up much more quickly and the ranunculus don't like it. They like cool roots, cool corms. So the ones in the ground are better. And so don't be tempted to plant them too shallow because they will be affected by all those variables like the frost and also the quickly heating up soil. So stick to that sort of 5 centimeters, I would say, and you'll be fine. But don't overthink it because I literally wasn't thinking about that on every single corm that I planted. It was just a general idea I had in my mind as I was planting them. Some probably aren't that deep at all, and that's just the way it is when you're planting so many. Then I, had to water the soil. Now, if you're pre-sprouting, what you need to do is just make sure that whatever medium you're using to pre-sprout your corms in doesn't dry out. You don't want your corms or your anemones corms to dry out, but you don't want them to be soaking and rotting either. So I did use a fine mist when I was pre-sprouting them indoors. And I would just touch the soil, and if it in any way felt crusty on the surface of that soil, like it was drying out, I would immediately just mist them all to make sure they were nice and moist. And I'd pretty much check them every day. So as I say, I did enrich the soil again, put a bit of extra vitamins and compost on, and then I watered it. And then I put this polytunnel, I bought this last year for 10 quid in the sale. I mean, they were just getting rid of all the summer stuff and it was £10. And I thought that looks like the perfect size for my ranuncular patch. So I don't have to have my ridiculous contraptions anymore. And so I just built this little polytunnel and I've put it over, and that will keep the soil. I put that over the soil actually while the ranunculus was soaking, just so that it would warm it up that little bit more. It is still February, and although it's been very warm, I just wanted that extra level of warmth just from the cover, and also didn't want the dog sort of scampering on it, the cat, doing her business in it. So that was that. And then once I had the ranunculus dug in, I just covered them over and I will just monitor them. I'll monitor the moisture levels of the soil like I would if I was pre-sprouting them indoors. And the other thing is, I will keep an eye on these ones that pre-sprouted on their own. So obviously they're a good indicator that everything is going well if they're growing, which they are. So I will just keep an eye. They will be my weather vane. If they're doing okay, I can assume that generally the ones in the soil will be doing okay too. If I get a little bit worried or impatient, I may just dig one up just to see if there's anything happening in a couple of weeks' time. But usually they will show me before I get concerned. They will start to sprout. So that's my ranunculus done. So I know that was a bit long, but that's kind of like really in-depth. Just gives you some ideas if you're new to growing ranunculus, or if you've grown ranunculus before, but you've had problems, so you're troubleshooting. And just so you know, like what the parameters are in terms of growing them outside, when you can put them outside, soil depth, etc., etc. So I just gave you everything I know, really, basically, at this point. I will link the other pre-sprouting one. If you want to do them indoors, I'll link that video below. But that's it. Hope you enjoyed that video. Hope it was helpful. And if it was, please subscribe, click the notification bell, and share with your friends, and also visit my website. Thanks for watching. Bye.